I think a lot of people are frustrated with games running slowly and looking bad, especially when they look like a blurry, smeared mess of pixels. And that's exactly what we're getting here with Monster Hunter Wilds. This video isn't just about that, but it's kind of what sparked me onto this topic, because this is a bigger topic in PC gaming where it doesn't feel like the visuals you're getting are matching the performance that you're getting. Because it's one thing if a game looks unbelievably stunning and is difficult to run, but it's another thing if the game looks kind of mid and still is incredibly difficult to run. Let's freeze this here for a second and look at what the footage is behind me. This is running the PC benchmark for Monster Hunter Wilds at its default settings for the, and by the way, the recommended settings for the game on hardware that's a bit above the recommended hardware requirements for the game. And this is running internally at 540p. This is DLSS performance mode on a 1080p display. And it's still only running in the mid 40 FPS range in this scene, and it's looking super blurry to get there. If you're on a tiny phone screen, you might not notice that so much. If you're on a PC-sized monitor, you will. By the way, on phones, you can kind of pinch and zoom. And the PC system requirements for this game are really highlighting exactly the issues that so many people are frustrated with right now in a lot of games that have been coming out. And these system requirements not only acknowledge these problems, but they're running head first into it, just like bam. They are saying that in order to hit 1080p 60 FPS, you're gonna have to upscale. By the way, they don't specify here, but what they mean at the medium settings is performance mode upscaling. So 540p internal resolution, that's 50% per axis, which means 1/4 of the pixels of 1080p, and then trying to upscale that into something that doesn't look like a blurry mess, and of course it fails. But also they're saying that still won't actually get you 60 FPS, despite only being at medium settings and running at 1/4 of the pixels of 1080p. They're saying you'll still need frame generation in order to hit that 60 FPS. And this is what people are frustrated with. Games that feel like instead of optimizing, they are just turning on upscaling and frame generation and calling it a day. Now, I wasn't in the room when this game was developed, so I don't know exactly what happened. And honestly, I think that part of the issue is that the RE engine doesn't seem to scale well to open worlds. This is the game, by the way, trying to run at native 1080p at the lowest possible settings, and in the same scene, we're only getting about 37 FPS, and I would argue it looks even worse than the 540p upscaled to 1080p medium settings that we're getting here. This looks more smeary, but at least is a little more cohesive and has a little more draw distance. This is the lowest settings, which just look extremely pixelated, even at native 1080p. And like, does anything in the distance even have a shadow? I mean, it's pretty rough. And again, running at 37 FPS. So this is where people are frustrated. We're feeling like, what I'm seeing on the screen doesn't look that great, and yet it's running terribly on the same PC that has been playing other games super, super well. For example, what if we look at Horizon Forbidden West? This is also running on an RTX 3060, and this is also an open world game, and it's running at its maximum settings here at around 50 FPS in a big populated town, and as you get out of town, it'll run it kind of in the mid-50s, and that's at its absolute maximum settings. And I don't think anybody would argue that this doesn't look great. And then also, you can go ahead and turn down to medium graphics settings, and now look, I'm running in the mid 70 FPS range here, and things scale down gracefully. This still looks good. Yeah, there's a difference between the very high settings and the medium settings in terms of like the draw distance at which things pop in, but still looks quite nice. And this is native 1080p, no upscaling. And then we get to this, where at native 1080p, things look awful and are still only running at 37 FPS. And if we go with the default recommended medium settings, we're upscaling from 540p, so things look extremely blurry. You can see it kind of smearing details together. And then also, I would still argue that things don't look all that impressive. Although generally art design is a bit subjective, but that's really where I wish a lot more games would focus, is can you design in art design that looks incredible without necessarily being super technically demanding. Check this out. This is Ghost of Tsushima running at its maximum settings. By the way, also an open world game. I'm trying to be fair and compare open world games to open world games, although I know Monster Hunter Wilds is doing different things with its open world, so it's never a direct comparison. But look at this. This looks gorgeous. But none of these tree leaves and the rocks and things like that actually have a massive amount of geometric detail or even really texture detail. But when you look at the image on the whole, it just looks gorgeous. This is amazing art design. Not only that, it can scale down appropriately. If I go down to medium settings, this still looks gorgeous, and now it's running at 85 FPS on the RTX 3060. And again, if we go back and switch to this 1080p native resolution, lowest possible settings, we're getting 37 FPS. Now, what if we turn Monster Hunter Wilds up to ultra settings? And this is native 1080p. The ultra would default to using DLSS. Again, kind of looking smeary at 1080p if you do that. So at native ultra settings, 1080p, we're getting 28 FPS. And again, I'd still argue that, well, this doesn't look that stunning or anything like that. And I think part of that is the art design. Well, maybe that's subjective, and maybe some of you guys are watching this and you're like, I prefer this. I think this looks better. And that's perfectly fair. But I do think it is important to think about the overall art design, and that it doesn't necessarily need to be technically demanding or technically impressive to deliver something that is still visually impressive, but a lot more performant. And that's where I think Ghost of Tsushima is an amazing masterclass in, wow, this looks beautiful. Even if I go down to medium settings, it still looks beautiful because it's the overall design. It's not that if you zoom in on one of the buckets on the side of the road that you can count the grains of lines in the wood and everything like that. It just looks awesome when you're playing the game, and it runs well. Now, so when I'm talking about is a game optimized or unoptimized, I would say that there's a few things that go into that. Because optimized doesn't mean it runs well. I think it means it delivers an optimal balance between it's trying to achieve something visually and it's doing it in an optimal way, right? So if you have a game that is chasing the just most incredibly impressive visuals you've ever seen, it might be justified to run slowly. And that's okay. Like, for example, if we look at something like Senua's Saga Hellblade 2, which, by the way, is not an open world game, so I don't think comparing this directly to Monster Hunter performance-wise is fair, and that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to show you that this game is trying to achieve basically what you would see in like a CG movie, but running in real time on gaming hardware. And I'd say it largely accomplishes that. Now, it's only running at about 37 FPS at 1080p on a 3060, but it's accomplishing something very visually impressive. And also not only that, but it actually does scale down to medium settings and still look pretty impressive, and now it's running in the mid 50 FPS range. But again, I don't think we can directly compare, the 37 FPS in this scene to the 37 FPS in this scene, because again, Monster Hunter Wilds is trying to be a big open world, and Hellblade 2 is not. So that is different. But what I'm saying is, a game running at 37 FPS doesn't necessarily tell me it's unoptimized. It might be trying to achieve something incredibly visually impressive. But I do think if something is optimized, the visuals should match what the performance is. And open world or not, 37 FPS on something that looks like this seems unreasonable to me. There should have been a better way to scale down the visuals and increase performance while still looking good. But maybe that would have had to have happened way back in the original design planning stage of the game, maybe even as far back as choosing the engine. Because again, looking at Dragon's Dogma 2, for example, which is also trying to use the RE engine in a big open world environment, that one kind of struggles too, especially when you get a lot of NPCs on the screen. So this issue of being unoptimized could actually just be an issue of, by the time they chose this engine, it might have already been too late for the game design that they were targeting. And, I think when we get to unoptimized games, I think that's another thing. Sometimes it is the engine choice. Like Unreal Engine, which this isn't, by the way. Hellblade is Unreal Engine 5. It can be difficult to get this super performance. So part of your game design choice is what engine you use. And for example, some of the games I was highlighting as seeming to be a lot more optimal I think are using their own custom engines, like with Ghost of Tsushima, and like the Decima engine I know is being used in Horizon Forbidden West. Anyway, so part of it is the engine choice. That is part of the game development process, is choosing what engine you're going to use. But I think another one is, I think consoles are the lead game development target generally. And what frame rate are they targeting, and what resolution are they targeting when they design the original game and its art, right? Because I think that a lot of game developers, when they started working on PS5 generation games several years ago, were used to the console paradigm where 30 FPS gaming was the norm. And if that's the case, and they're targeting 30 FPS for their original design choices, that gives you a certain frame time budget, a certain number of milliseconds in which each frame is going to be computed. And if you instead target 60 FPS, you're losing a ton of those milliseconds of time to compute the frame. So I think that if a game is originally designed around a 30 FPS target on consoles, that's where we're seeing the ones where if you want to run it at 60 FPS, you end up like this is, which is butchering everything with crazy levels of upscaling because the original art was not designed around running super well. So you just have to reduce the burden on the GPU to decrease the frame time cost by just cutting the resolution. Or just really, one thing I'm seeing here when we go down to the lowest settings, or just really ungracefully butchering the overall art. Like they have the certain target they were looking for, and if you want to go below that, it just kind of looks awful. You're just turning off certain settings. It just looks bad, right? This does not scale down gracefully. So, but again, I think part of it is also just the engine choice from the original place. But in general, this is what a lot of people are frustrated with. Games that are designed to run on, reasonable hardware. But on that reasonable hardware, they're relying on massive levels of upscaling and even frame generation just to hit 60 FPS. So I think game designers need to realize that what a lot of people want is a game that plays well. And part of playing well is playing at a good frame rate. And honestly, 60 FPS on reasonable, console-ish level hardware, I think should be the default game design choice. And you need to start the game from the ground up with that target. Because if you don't, I think you end up in this kind of a situation. And so, again, I'm not a game developer, and I think all the different issues come in with different engine choices and everything like that. But I think a big part of it really should be designing art that looks beautiful without necessarily needing to be extremely demanding to run. And certain games, I think, do that super well. And I think everybody's happy with that. When people get a game that looks nice, it doesn't need to push all the boundaries, but performs well, I think they're happy with that. So people are looking for games that are fun to play and look good enough and run well, right? That's what they want. Now, I think it's totally okay to just have your own thing you're going for, to try to push the absolute boundaries of what a rendering live can do. That's okay if that's your game design target, and that's really a whole different thing. But at the same time, the actual gameplay of a game like this is also targeting something different, right? This is mostly slowly walking, right? Whereas a game like Monster Hunter, you're in big battles. This is about the gameplay. It's not about being a visual showcase, and yet somehow it manages to be incredibly demanding on the GPU. It's a bit rough. Anyway, I'm not quite sure exactly how to end this video, other than you guys could tell me about how you feel about the current state of game optimization in the comment section. Because again, I think it's about, does it match, is what you're seeing matching the performance level that you're getting? Because a lot of times nowadays, I don't think it is. And there's something going wrong in the initial, I think, design phase of the game, or the optimization phase of the game, or both, where something needs to be different, because this isn't looking good. And if we look at the performance advantages we're getting from newer generations of hardware, they're looking to be getting less jumps in the future. So it used to be the case that, this game came out, it performs badly, just wait a year and graphics cards are gonna be like twice as powerful. We're not getting those huge jumps anymore either. So it's at the same time as all of this is happening, it's getting harder to just brute force through it. Not that it's really great to have to do that anyway. But anyway, that's where we're at. Let me know how you feel about all of this in the comment section, and I still hope all of you have an excellent day.